Lesson 4 is looking at nested iterative processes. So remember, iterative code, we're looking at while loops, for loops, things that can repeat. Nested means we're going to put one of those inside of another. All right. So nested iteration statements, okay, appear in the body of another iteration statement. And when you have a loop inside of another one, that inside loop has to complete itself before you can run a second iteration of the outside loop. So I got just kind of three loops here to start us with, just kind of some classic examples of nested iteration. And in this first one here, I've asked, how many stars will be printed and how will they be arranged? So if you look at my code, I've got this loop here. This loop looks like it's set up to run 10 iterations. All right. And this loop to me looks like it's set up to run 8 iterations. Right. So the outside 1 through 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We include the 10. Here we include the 8. We didn't start at 0, so there's no tricks. Okay. And what that's saying about the inside loop must complete all of its iterations is we need to run this piece of code to exhaustion before we can step out of it. So this process starts here. As long as 1's less than 10, which it is, we step into this loop. However, once we step into this loop, we actually start running another loop. And this loop, since 1 is less than or equal to 8, we go ahead and print a star. At that point, though, because of that closing brace, we're forced to stop right in here. So that closing brace is going to send me back up to the loop. The B++ sends B to 2, which is still less than or equal to 8, so we print another star. And we're going to keep doing that until this loop quits. This loop's built to run 8 iterations, so it's going to print 8 stars. Every time I encounter this piece of code, I could effectively think of this as saying print 8 stars. Okay? So essentially, that code that I just erased is going to result in the printing of 8 stars, and it was a print method, so they're going to print all in the same line. Well, notice that once we break free from that loop, we see a print line method, which is essentially like hitting the enter key, right? It's going to drop the cursor one row. So again, this highlighted loop with a print method is going to print 8 stars, okay, all in a row. Once we're done, we'll step out and we'll run this piece of code, which is just a print line, drop the cursor one. We'll hit this closing brace, which will send us back to the very top with a new A value. A was 1, so now it's 2, which is still less than or equal to 10. So we come in and we do this all again. We're going to print 8 stars, hit the enter key. So in other words, 10 different times we're going to print 8 stars. That's going to result in 80 stars. Okay. So we're going to see 80 asterisk print. And if you're watching here, like if we think of it, there's going to be 10 rows of 8 stars, which sometimes we call like a column. So like 10 rows, 8 columns. But there's going to be 10 rows of 8 stars, and that's where the 80 comes from. Let's see if that happens here in the console area. All right. So again, this is kind of just a classic nested iteration. Let's see what it looks like. Maybe. All right. Yeah. And so, oh, those negative ones, that's from something we're going to do in a minute. Sorry about that. But yeah, so we've got this here. See how if you counted, there's 10 different rows, and each row has 8 stars. So 10 rows of 8 stars is what came out of this loop. All right. We could turn that one off or leave it on, doesn't matter. All right. If we look at this next one here, it says how many stars will be printed? How will they be arranged? Okay, well, it looks pretty similar to start, right? We've got an outside loop running 5 times, so that's 5 iterations from that outside loop, all right? The inside loop, here's where we see a little bit of a difference. So notice that the inside loop doesn't have a fixed number here. I put the variable a, which is our outside loop variable. Now, the first time the outside loop runs, a would be 1. 1 is less than or equal to 1, so we would get 1 iteration, 1 star. Then the B value would jump up to 2, and we wouldn't get a second iteration. So the first time this runs, we'd get 1 iteration. However, that's not actually always going to be the case. So the second time that our loop runs, the A value would have incremented to 2, allowing the inside loop to run 2 times. First, it would start at 1, and 1 would be less than or equal to 2. And then B would jump up to 2, and then 2 would be less than or equal to 2. So it would get 2 iterations. So 1 iteration sort of followed by 2 iterations. Okay. Well, remember the outside loop's going to run 5 times. So it's going to run again a third time. And when the third time that the outside loop runs, the A value would have made its way up to 3. And if you put a 3 here, you would get 3 iterations. So now we've gone to 3 iterations. Then we would get 4, and then we would get 5. So it's going to be 1 iteration followed by 2 iterations, followed by 3, followed by 4, followed by 5. So that seems to me like a total of 15 different times we're going to print a star. So there's going to be 15 stars printed. This is going to be kind of like a triangle, okay? And so the triangle is going to have like 1 star on the top, okay? Then 2 on the next row, okay? So 2 stars on the next row. And then it's going to have 3 stars, okay? And then it's going to have 4 stars and 5 stars on the bottom row. And, we could try that out and see if that comes out to be the case. Let's see. So each time that it runs, we're going to kind of get 1 more star. Initially 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. And that's what we see right here. Okay. And that's because by putting that variable there, I changed how often that inside loop was allowed to run. It wasn't fixed. Here it was rigid. This had to run 8 times. This had to run 10. So there's nothing there that was allowed to be dynamic or to change. Okay. This is more what we call like a static fixture. So it was always going to be, I'm sorry, this was the dynamic one. The first one was the static one. All right. So this one's allowed to change. All right. And let's look at the third example. Okay. All right. Now I put a little bit of a trick here, right? This would not result in 4 iterations. That would actually only result in 3 iterations because it goes 1, 2, 3, and then it would actually quit on 4 because 4 is not less than 4. So 1, 2, 3, those values of A all work. Now, if A equaled 1, which it would on its first pass, then B equals 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 would all succeed and cause a true. 6 wouldn't. So the first time up, we're going to get 5 iterations. Okay. But on the next pass, the B value would initialize to A, which would have made its way to 2. So now it would go 2, 3, 4, 5, quit on 6. 2, 3, 4, 5. That's 4 iterations. So this time it's followed by 4. Okay. And then it's followed by 3 iterations because if you initialized it to A, which was 3, it would only go 3, 4, 5, and then it would quit. All right. So since we're initializing B to A, again, it's kind of changing each time how many iterations there can be, and we have to stay under 6. This is going to print a star. This is going to drop a line. So I'm going to see 5 stars followed by 4, followed by 3. That's a total of 12. And they're going to happen in an arrangement. It's still going to be not really a triangle. I guess what would this be? Kind of like I don't know, parallelogram or a quadrilateral or whatever. So a trapezoid. You can tell I haven't taken geometry in 30 years. Okay. So it's a trapezoid. It's going to be like 5 and then 4 and then 3. Let's see what it looks like. Okay. Yeah. All right. Kind of like a trapezoid. Oh, well. All right. And so, yeah. All right. So these are just some different nested loop things to get you thinking. Now, when would we maybe write a nested loop? I've got a pretty tough one here. This would be a difficult test question for sure, but definitely could see something like this on an AP exam. They've had questions like this in the past. So I'm going to write a longest streak method. And what it's going to do is it's going to try to count the longest string of X's found in the overall string. So for example, like right here, there's 2 X's in a row. Okay. Right here, there's 5 X's in a row. And right here, there's 3. So the longest streak found within this string was a string of 5 in the middle. There was 5 X's strung together. Okay. There weren't any X's in this one, so we said 0. There was only 1 here. So, I mean, I guess it's like 1 in a row, right? So 1. And then this one had 6 X's in a row, and I put them right at the end. That might actually cause a little error if we're not careful. So that one had a streak of 6, and there was no other one to compare it to. All right, this is going to be difficult. This is a challenging method to write. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an int, and I'm going to call it max streak. And I'm going to initialize it to 0, because until I find an X, I'm just assuming that there is no streak of X's in a row. All right. And then when I'm done, that's going to be my return. Like, I'm hoping that this variable will contain my answer when I'm finished. And I'm going to write a loop. And this loop, I hope to cover all the indexes of X. Now, again, there's different ways that I could do this. I could start my loop at 1 and then take a 1-letter substring kind of backwards, like I minus 1 to I. I could start my loop at 0 and then go from I to I plus 1. If I do that, I don't want to let I quite reach the length of the string if I'm going to bring in an I plus 1. Okay, so I have that extra room to get that last piece without going too far. And all right. Now, inside my loop, I'm going to start another variable. I'm going to call this one current streak. This variable is going to actually count the X's as they occur. When I'm done counting, I'll figure out if I had a longer streak than before. All right. And I might need to take like a 1-letter substring. However, you got to be a little careful. If you made a 1-letter substring here, it might mess up the process. I'm going to kind of take it on the fly. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to write another loop right now. And here's how this loop's going to work. I'm going to take a letter and I'm going to ask if it equals X. If it does, I'm going to go get the next letter. And then if it's an X, I'll go get the next one. But if that first letter I take is not an X, then I'm not even going to bother with this. I'll let my outside loop take me to the next index. But when I do find an X, I'm going to have a while loop that would actually sort of break apart from the for loop in a sense and start considering if there were more X's coming. Remember, if you write a loop inside of a loop, that inside loop has to run to completion. So here's how my inside loop's going to work. It's going to say, let's take a look at this string's letter that's found at index I, okay, which is the I plus 1 string. Okay, if you take that substring, that's the letter found at index I. If that letter is an X, this is going to say true, and my loop is going to now kick in, my inside loop, not the outside loop. Remember, I'm going to be stuck in this loop until it completes itself. So if I'm in this loop, then I found an X, and I want to take my current streak variable and make it get bigger. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to advance the loop control variable. Now, we're already doing that on the for loop, okay? But I'm doing it separately here because remember what I was saying, like I'm going to be stuck inside this loop until it breaks, until it becomes false. So if I make it into this loop, I found an X. If I found an X, I'll count it and I'll go looking for another one at the next index. If it's an X, I'll count it and I'll go to the next one. Eventually, when you get to the end of your streak, you'll go and get another letter. Like in this case, maybe I'd find the letter D, and then I wouldn't have an X and I would break free from this loop. I'll be stuck in this loop as long as there's X's strung together. Once I break free from this loop, I'm going to ask a question about that current streak variable. Okay. Did that variable actually exceed the max streak variable? And if it did, Well, that means that whatever I thought was the longest streak previously really wasn't. Okay. And so I need to sort of change my thinking. I'm going to reset it to whatever I just found. Now, at that point, I would actually hit this closing brace and it would carry me all the way back to the top. Now, if I had just come out of a streak of X's, the loop variable would have progressed during this process, and that's okay. That's okay. It would just pick up wherever that left off. If you make changes to I here, it doesn't like, offset this or make it go back, or they're just working the same. We're talking about the same variable. So if it moved over during this process, that's fine. We'll just pick up where we left off. If we didn't, then the outside loop will still move us on to the next one. So we'll never get stuck or anything like that. All right, this is going to work kind of. So this would find the 5 and the 0 and the 1, but it would actually crash on that last case. So that last one there would actually blow this one up. So if I turn this off for a minute, and if I just stop this here, just so you can see, okay, this code I'm predicting, unless there's a typo I missed, but it should work on those first 3 cases. All right, so I got the 5, 0, and the 1. It was successfully counting the X's. And notice how it even found that streak in the middle of the 5 X's. It didn't get confused by this streak of 3 or the other streak of 2 or something like that. Okay, but back to that other case, the one that I turned off for a minute. Let's turn that case back on, and then let me take this out of here. And now it's unfortunately going to crash and go out of bounds. So we didn't have any out of bounds issues earlier. We didn't have any off by 1 errors. Everything was great. This loop was successfully considering all of the valid indexes of I. There's really nothing wrong with that loop. That loop was perfectly okay. The problem was right here. When I started moving through that inside loop, I didn't put any type of protection on it. And as a result, if I had a string of X's that carried right up to the end of the string, after I found that 6th X, it would have gone on and tried to look for another X. And I didn't have any way here to stop that process. So what I could do, this is where we could actually use that short circuit that we learned about previously. We have to put this in the front. It has to be the first condition. But we could say, like, we only go searching for another letter, assuming that there is one. Now, if this turns out to be false, what that would mean is that you had moved to an index beyond the end of the string, past the last valid index. And if this shows up false in an and statement, this would short circuit it and actually shut it down. And remember what that means is you don't even read the right side then. And so this would actually prevent us from going out of bounds using that short circuit piece that we learned about previously in I guess unit 3. All right. And so now notice that it correctly counted the 5, the 0, the 1, and the 6, and it didn't go out of bounds. But I had to be kind of careful with that. Some other things I want to point out while we're here. If you notice this int, okay, I made this int prior to the start of the loop. We've talked about that a little bit before. Remember, if I had declared that variable inside the loop, I wouldn't be able to use it outside of the loop. So that was very important. I had to declare max streak prior to the start of the loop to make it available to me after the loop ended, okay, when I was all finished with my process. I also did that kind of differently here. Like I put int current streak inside. What if we had moved that variable outside? It wouldn't cause an error per se. Like there's not going to be like a scope error. You can declare a variable outside and use it inside, like I was doing with max streak, okay? But the problem is if I move that out here, it would only initialize it to 0 once. And then every time you count an X, it would actually just keep going up. So I think we're going to get something like 10 maybe on that first one, because it's just going to count all of the X's. It doesn't understand now that like when a streak breaks, it has to go back to 0. And so see, it was fine everywhere except for that first case, because Now it was just counting all of the X's. If it didn't like go back to zero at some point, then it wouldn't understand that like a new streak was starting. Remember, this was handling the entire streak. So prior to that, I had to make sure to start at zero. You could declare the variable here, like that would technically be fine, but you'd have to reset it to zero somewhere in the loop, either at the top or technically at the bottom. You could get away with it too, but like somewhere before the next process started, it had to be reset to zero. Okay, so now it's working again. I kind of like it the way I had it originally, but I'm just saying that, there were some other ways you can handle it.